Hello everyone, we are here today at the Royal Military Museum in Brussels, and I am standing in the last remnant of a less known Belgian tank of World War II, the Renault ACG-1. Today we will have a deep dive into the fascinating yet troubled history of this vehicle. In May 1940, as the German Blitzkrieg swept across the border, Belgium wasn't entirely without armor. They possessed two squadrons of medium cavalry tanks, 8 in total, the French Renault ACG-1, also known in France as the AMC-35. In the 1930s, France intended to update its aging tank fleet, and it developed several new tank types. On the one hand, you had the AMR, the Automitrailleuse de Reconnaissance, or the reconnaissance tanks, and they also had the AMC, Automitrailleuse de Combat, or the armored battle tanks. In 1934, the first type of this second type of vehicle appeared, the AMC-34. But new requirements led to an update of its armor to be more capable of withstanding the current anti-tank arms, and that became the AMC-35. This AMC-35 was the official French designation of this vehicle. However, Renault, the producer of the vehicle, also gave it an official factory designation. Normally this used to be a two-letter combination, such as the Renault FT or the Renault UE, but by 1934 they had run out of two-letter combinations, and this new design was labeled the Renault ACG-1. Belgium, as an export user of this vehicle, also knew the vehicle under this designation. In September 1935, Belgium ordered 25 ACG-1s from Renault. The plan was to equip two cavalry divisions, one Dutch and one French, with this new vehicle, and also the elite Chasseurs Ardennais unit, the Ardennes Hunters. However, Renault faced massive internal struggles, including strikes and the nationalization of its military division into AMX. By the time a prototype arrived in June 1937, testing showed it was heavier than promised and had poor climbing capabilities and thus not suited for difficult terrain such as the Ardennes. This coincided with political debate in Belgium about on how to stay neutral and appease each of its neighbors. By December 1937, the order was cancelled, and the budget was redirected to the production of lighter and domestically produced Belgian T-13 tank destroyers. The French government, embarrassed by the cancellation, pressured Renault into a new deal in April 1938. Belgium agreed to take 10 tanks as compensation for the fine. To maintain the appearance of neutrality, they are officially classified as autoblindés lourds, heavy armored car, rather than tanks in all official documents. An interesting side effect of the initial order of 25 vehicles was that the corresponding number of turrets of the APX-2B, with the B standing for Belgium, had already been produced and delivered. It seemed that someone had forgot to inform Batignolles-Châtillon, where the initial order for the turrets was placed, that this order was changed. So this left Belgium with a surplus of 15 turrets of the APX-2B, with which they had to find a new purpose. These were repurposed for static defense. 13 were installed in coastal pillboxes, and 2 were placed in bunkers at Remouchon in the Ardennes, part of Belgium's southern defensive network. This was also the case for this turret over here at the Royal Military Museum, which was installed at the harbor of Zeebrugge, where it was intended to protect its vital access to the sea. The turret will be part of a larger bunker consisting of several rooms such as a combat room, ammunition stowage, and an access room. These bunkers had to be capable of withstanding the impact of large caliber shells. While the tank had a crew of 3, these turrets had a crew of 5. Commander gunner and loader in the turret, underneath him someone to prepare the shells, and 2 additional crewmen ensuring ventilation. These turret bunkers were built just before the start of hostilities in the winter of 1939-1940. While the bunkers were made of concrete, they were covered with stone and brick to blend in with the background. The turrets themselves were camouflaged as well. The usefulness of these bunkers, however, is controversial. 13 bunkers were spread out over an area of 15 kilometers instead of being concentrated in a heavily defended area. Some of the bunkers were even built on the beach, raising doubts on their usefulness during spring tides. Perhaps their installment can be seen as a political maneuver, a sign of armed neutrality to ensure political opposition that Belgium's western border was equally defended as its eastern border with the Netherlands and Germany. During the German occupation, the turrets were incorporated into the Atlantic Wall. This turret here in Zeebrugge was incorporated into the German defense system of the Zeebrugge U-boat harbor. So let's have a closer look at the APX-2B turret that was used on the ACG-1. The turret itself, it is casted, and you have several large armored plates attached to the different sides. The armor thickness would be around 25 millimeters, which was at the time of development considered sufficient, but of course during World War II, the opening days, it was not really sufficient. Its main ornament is a 47 millimeter FRC gun, Fonderie Royale de Canon, Belgian gun. It was a very potent anti-tank gun at the time. It was compact, it could fire anti-tank and high explosive shells, and by the opening days of World War II it was one of the best anti-tank guns that you can find. The only disadvantage of this gun was that it was quite heavy, so it was not really easy to use for the infantry, but of course in a tank modification it was less important and it was a very capable gun. It is also armed with the coaxial machine gun over here. Belgium initially intended to arm it with a heavier 13.2 millimeter Browning machine gun, for which they had bought the license. But eventually they used the Hotchkiss 7.65 millimeter machine gun instead, because that gun was more easily available and it cost less to use, because it was also used in the previous Belgium Renault FT tanks. So they could just take the guns out of those old vehicles and install it here, and of course it cost a lot less. Access is by two means. You have a large hatch over here for the commander position. He also had a small hole to peep through, but the main access to the turret was at the back. And has a double hatch over here to open access to the turret. An interesting fact about the turret itself: it is quite roomy for its time, for a French vehicle of its time, and it was actually the only vehicle that had a turret accommodating two people. So all the other French vehicles, they had smaller turrets with room for only one person, except for, of course, the enormous Char 2C. For the rest, this was quite a novelty, that two people could be inside the turret, the commander of the tank and the gunner. The tank had okay visibility by a few different means. At 4 places, you have these elements, and these are actually diascopes, and I guess you could compare them with a kind of binoculars with 2 holes to look through. They don't magnify anything, they're just for viewing. And in this instrument you had 2 glass cones through which the person on the side would look. In the case of a direct hit inside this area, the glass would shatter finely, and an automatic metal plate would be lowered to protect the eyes from this direct impact. Of course, with the metal plate lowered, you couldn't watch through anymore, but it was very easily to change the glass element inside the tank and to open the access again. Except for this, you also had over here, in this thing, a periscope, a small periscope to be used from the inside, and it had a 6 times magnifying capabilities and could be used in all directions for the commander of the vehicle. And then by last means of visibility, you also had a smaller vision slit, such as this. This turret, both in its bunker and tank configuration, could turn 360 degrees automatically by means of an electric motor on the inside, by which we can find some remnants over here. It took about 2 minutes to fully rotate the turn, and if the electricity would fail, it could also be done manually by means of a crankshaft, and with 200 manual turns you could also fully rotate the turret. Technically, the ACG-1 had quite a few issues. The tank itself weighed around 16 tons and had a 180 horsepower 4-cylinder engine, which was actually a smaller derivative of the Char B engine of 6 cylinders, which was more powerful. However, both French and Belgian testing found its mechanical reliability insufficient, and also the climbing capabilities of this vehicle were not good enough for Belgium, who wanted to also equip this vehicle in its southern area where a lot of hills, so it was not really suited for that terrain. Also, its 25 millimeters of armor was quite insufficient by the opening days of World War II, as we will see later in this video. However, the tank's greatest asset was this turret, which could house a two-man crew in which the commander could focus on leadership and of course the gunner on handling the weapons. And that was a luxury that only few French vehicles possessed. The vehicles finally arrived in Belgium in 1939, 46 months later than originally stipulated in the contracts. Two of the tanks that Belgium had received earlier were in a bad condition and written off for spare parts just to keep the remaining 8 operational. The remaining 8 tanks were organized into 2 platoons of 4 vehicles, bearing a rhino symbol as their insignia. The tanks had no radios and used flags to signal or dispatch their messages by bike or motorcycle. On the 10th of May 1940, the German invasion of Belgium began, and the vehicles were sent to Brussels to patrol and hunt for German paratroopers. It was not until the 16th of May that they got a real first assignment, and they were sent north of Brussels to protect vital bridges over the canal between Willebroek and Vilvoorde. The tanks saw their first real action on May 17 at Capelle op den Bosch. Adjutant Pullings in Tank 829 and Adjutant Dumoulin in 833 engaged German scouts and destroyed several 37mm anti-tank guns, including one hidden behind a billboard. However, Pullings' tank was hit, his driver was killed, but he managed to rescue his wounded gunner. Pullings returned to his tank and continued to fight the machine gun before eventually escaping. This deployment, however, saw the tanks used as anti-tank guns and failed to exploit the main asset of the vehicle, its speed and mobility. After some retreats and skirmishes, 3 of the ACG-1s take part in a counterattack in the direction of Antwerp. The lead vehicle, commanded by Lieutenant Gailly, was knocked out by a 37mm gun at Zwijndrecht. Gailly was burned but managed to escape his vehicle. Later, when he was interned in a prisoner of war camp in Germany, Gailly would watch a German propaganda movie illustrating the Belgian campaign. In this film, his tank was set on fire for dramatic effect, after which Gailly loudly claims that this was not the case in 1940. A few days later, the remaining tanks regroup and take part in a counterattack supporting infantry at Quatrecht. One of the drivers recounts, "When we reached our objective, we charged and crushed some German motorcycles and sidecars behind the blockhouse. Tank 803 is ambushed in close distance by a battery of anti-tank guns. After the action, I take route to Ghent to rejoin the Belgian infantry. I suddenly feel a violent shock. I continue driving, but notice I haven't received any commands for some time. After I stop and check on the rest of the crew in the turret, I find them leaning against each other dead. A shell has entered the turret and exploded inside. I continue driving back. The tank takes fire another 3 times, but I manage to reach our lines. After the action, the tank is written off." The next days, until the Belgian capitulation on the 28th of May, the remaining vehicles operate alongside T-13 tank destroyers in the final skirmishes of the battle for Belgium. On several occasions, the unfamiliar ACG-1 tanks were fired upon by Belgian troops, causing them to fly the Belgian flag. The ACG-1 squadron ends the campaign with 2 of their 8 vehicles remaining, one of which immobilized. The ACG-1 remains a symbol of Belgium's difficult pre-war position, caught between investing in defense and modernizing the army, but also the desire to stay neutral and not offending any of its neighbors. If you want to see a surviving AMC-35, so the French example, there is only one left, and it's at the Musée des Blindés at Saumur, the French tank museum. This APX-2 turret over here is the only piece left of a Belgian ACG-1, and it's here to be seen in Brussels. If you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and follow us for more tank-related content. Bye.